May 14, 1943, 14:30 hours, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. Korvettenkapitan Werner Henke stood on the deck of the USS Card, his iron cross hidden beneath a borrowed American jacket, watching the Virginia coastline materialize through the afternoon haze. The submarine commander, who had terrorized Allied shipping lanes for 18 months, sinking 24 vessels totaling 125,000 tons, now found himself counting the impossible number of Liberty ships crowding Hampton Roads. 1, 5, 12, 27 cargo vessels in a single harbor view. His U-515 had stalked these waters mere weeks ago, hunting for lone stragglers. The intelligence reports from Berlin had assured him American shipbuilding couldn't exceed 15 vessels per month across the entire nation. Yet here, in one harbor alone, sat nearly 2 months' worth of what German intelligence claimed was America's total production capacity. The American Guard, a young sergeant from Nebraska named Harold Brennan, noticed Henke's expression and followed his gaze. "First time seeing the roads, Capitan?" Brennan asked in broken German, his Midwest accent mangling the pronunciation. Henke nodded slowly, his trained submariner's eye automatically calculating tonnage. Each Liberty ship displaced 14,245 tons, fully loaded. 27 vessels meant 384,615 tons of shipping capacity casually anchored in a single American port. His U-boat Wolfpack's greatest coordinated success had managed to sink 80,000 tons in a month. The mathematical impossibility crashed over him like a North Atlantic wave. "How many?" Henke finally asked in English, his voice barely above a whisper. "How many what?" Brennan responded, genuinely confused. "Ships. How many ships does America build?" Brennan shrugged. "Dunno exactly. Papers said Kaiser's yards in California launched 3 in a single day last week. Richmond Yard claims they can finish 1 in 4.5 days now." He pointed toward the Elizabeth River. "Newport News has 6 ways going simultaneously. Norfolk Naval probably has another 12 under construction." Henke gripped the rail until his knuckles went white. 3 ships in 1 day. His crews had risked everything to sink perhaps 1 ship every 2 weeks. The Kriegsmarine's entire U-boat fleet, at its peak strength of 240 operational boats, had managed to sink 230 ships in the best month of the tonnage war. If one American shipyard could launch 3 vessels in a single day, and there were multiple shipyards, the transport truck waiting at the dock bore a sign that made Henke's stomach turn. "Camp Allen, Processing Center Number 7. Number 7. How many processing centers existed? How many German prisoners were already here? As the truck rumbled through Norfolk's industrial district, Henke observed factory after factory stretching to the horizon. Workers, including numerous women and even elderly men, streamed through the gates at shift change. The Ford plant alone seemed to employ thousands. A parking lot revealed hundreds of private automobiles, workers' cars, not military vehicles. German factory workers rode bicycles or walked. These Americans drove to work in their own automobiles to build weapons of war. At a railroad crossing, they waited as a freight train passed. Henke counted 140 cars loaded with brand-new Sherman tanks before losing count. Each tank required 500,000 pounds of steel, aluminum, and copper to manufacture. The train disappeared around a bend, but the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails continued for another 5 minutes. How many tanks? 200? 300? On a single train? The Wehrmacht's monthly tank production peaked at 900 vehicles of all types. This one American train carried perhaps a third of Germany's entire monthly output. The prisoners in the truck with Henke began murmuring amongst themselves. Oberleutnant Friedrich Guggenberger, commander of U-81, who had sunk the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, sat in stunned silence, watching the industrial panorama roll past. "Mein Gott," he whispered to Henke, "we were told American factories were converting from civilian production. These look purpose-built for war production. How long have they been preparing?" Before Henke could respond, Their truck pulled alongside another convoy. This one carried American recruits, fresh-faced boys who looked barely 18. They were singing, laughing, some playing harmonicas. Their uniforms were crisp, new, perfectly fitted. Their boots gleamed with fresh leather. Henke thought of the last Wehrmacht recruits he'd seen boarding transport ships in France, boys in uniforms patched together from dead men's clothing, carrying mixed equipment from 4 different armies, their training cut from 12 weeks to 4. "Look at their teeth," muttered Bootsmart Karl Dönitz, no relation to the Grand Admiral, a submariner from U-118. It was a strange observation, but Henke understood immediately. The American boys had perfect teeth, straight, white, complete. Products of a nation that could afford dental care for its children, vitamin-enriched foods, abundant nutrition, even during wartime. The contrast with the latest German recruits, many showing signs of malnutrition from years of rationing, was devastating. The processing centre's entrance bore a sign that stopped Henke cold. Norfolk Reception Centre. Capacity 5,000. 5,000? This single facility could process more prisoners than Germany captured in most Eastern Front operations. As they dismounted, Henke noticed stacks of Red Cross packages, each one containing chocolate, cigarettes, coffee, cheese, and canned meat. Luxuries that had vanished from Germany in 1941. Here they sat in neat pyramids, waiting for distribution to enemies of the state. Inside Camp Allen, the registration process revealed another layer of American organizational capacity. Each prisoner received a medical examination using X-ray machines. X-ray machines for prisoners. Dental checks, psychological evaluations, and skills assessments. The paperwork was typewritten on electric typewriters, carbon-copied in triplicate, filed in steel cabinets that stretched along entire walls. The German military still relied on handwritten records. Here, even prisoner processing was mechanized. The camp commandant, Colonel William Gano, addressed the new arrivals through an interpreter. "Gentlemen, you will be transported to one of 511 prisoner-of-war camps across the United States. Your camp assignment depends on your rank, skills, and security classification. 511 camps, the number hit like artillery. Germany struggled to maintain 40 camps for Allied prisoners, each overcrowded and undersupplied. America had built over 500, with more under construction. Henke was assigned to Camp Crossville, Tennessee, designated for naval officers. The 3-day train journey to Tennessee became an education in American geography and industrial distribution that no intelligence report had prepared him for. Through the windows of their Pullman car, a Pullman car, with beds and a dining section for prisoners, Henke watched America reveal itself mile by mile. Richmond, Virginia, chemical plants and cigarette factories working triple shifts. Roanoke, locomotive repair yards servicing hundreds of engines. Bristol, munitions factories with rail spurs leading to covered loading docks. Knoxville, aluminum smelters feeding the aircraft industry, their electric furnaces glowing like man-made stars in the night. At every stop, the train took on supplies. Fresh milk in refrigerated containers, bread still warm from industrial bakeries, meat from Chicago packing houses, vegetables from California farms. The logistics of feeding prisoners better than German officers ate at the front revealed an agricultural and transportation system of incomprehensible efficiency. One conductor, making conversation, mentioned that America shipped 6.5 million tons of food to Britain and Russia monthly. Monthly. The entire German agricultural system struggled to produce that in a quarter. Major Hans von Luck, captured in Tunisia and traveling in the same car, performed calculations on a scrap of paper. If they can spare 6.5 million tons monthly for Allies, their total food production must exceed 50 million tons monthly. The Reich's entire annual production is 38 million tons, and we're starving our occupied territories to achieve that. He crumpled the paper, his face ashen. The train passed through Memphis at dawn on the 3rd day. The Mississippi River stretched before them, its surface dotted with barges carrying oil from Texas, steel from Pittsburgh, grain from Iowa. Henke counted 42 barges in view simultaneously. Each barge carried at 1,500 tons of cargo. Simple mathematics, 63,000 tons of materials, moving on one stretch of river he could observe. The Rhine, Germany's vital artery, rarely saw a quarter of this traffic even before Allied bombing began. Camp Crossville sprawled across 85,000 acres of Tennessee countryside. The base hospital had 200 beds, with surgical facilities equal to any German field hospital. The recreation building contained a 10,000-volume library, a theater showing Hollywood films twice weekly, and sports equipment that would have supplied an entire Wehrmacht division. The mess hall served portions that made Henke's stomach ache with their abundance. 2 eggs, bacon, toast, butter, jam, coffee with real cream, and sugar for breakfast. This was prisoners' food. What did American soldiers eat? The camp's German-language newspaper, created by prisoners, but supplied with American paper and printing equipment, contained advertisements from Sears Roebuck. Prisoners could order clothing, books, musical instruments, art supplies, anything except weapons or maps, from a catalogue thicker than the Wehrmacht's infantry manual. The catalogue claimed to stock 100,000 different items in warehouses across America, 100,000 different consumer goods available during total war. Colonel Thomas Drake, the camp commander, held a briefing for new officer prisoners. A map of the United States covered the entire wall. Red pins marked POW camps. Blue pins indicated major military installations. Green pins showed industrial centers. The map was a constellation of colored pins, each representing American organizational capacity. Drake spoke through an interpreter, but his message needed no translation. Gentlemen, you may write letters home. The Red Cross will ensure delivery. You may tell your families you are safe, well-fed, and properly treated. You may not reveal military information, but you may describe your living conditions. But the subtext was clear. Tell Germany what America is really like. Let them know what they're fighting. Henke's first letter home, cleared by censors, contained a single devastating line that passed scrutiny because it seemed innocuous. I ate fresh oranges in Tennessee today. His wife would understand. Oranges hadn't been seen in Germany since 1940. Here, German prisoners ate them in camps 500 miles from the nearest citrus grove, transported by refrigerated trains that ran on schedule despite wartime demands. 3 weeks into captivity, Henke watched a newsreel in the camp theater. The Battle of Kursk raged on the Eastern Front. German propaganda, even filtered through American editing, claimed victory. But Henke focused on background details the editors hadn't considered important enough to cut. The Sherman tanks visible behind Soviet lines, the Studebaker trucks carrying Soviet infantry, the American-made boots on Russian feet. Lend-lease materials flowing 13,000 miles from Detroit to Stalingrad, the logistics chain required boggled comprehension. Lieutenant Commander Reinhard Hardigan, the infamous commander of U-123, who had sunk ships within sight of New York's lights during Operation Drumbeat, sat beside Henke. I torpedoed tankers off Cape Hatteras, he whispered. Watched them burn through my periscope. Thought I was strangling American fuel supplies. Yesterday, I learned America produces 67% of the world's oil. 67%. I was sinking drops in an ocean of petroleum. The camp received new prisoners weekly. Each brought fragments of information that assembled into an increasingly terrifying mosaic. Luftwaffe pilots reported encountering American fighters over Germany that hadn't existed 6 months earlier. P-51 Mustangs with British-designed engines mass-produced in Detroit. Panzer crews described facing American tanks in Italy that incorporated improvements based on North African combat reports from just months previous. The American military-industrial complex adapted, evolved, and produced solutions faster than Germany could identify problems. A captured Wehrmacht logistics officer, Major Kurt Waldheim, shared intelligence from his interrogation with Henke. They asked me about German rail capacity. When I told them we moved 700 trains daily at our peak, they laughed. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone operates 900 trains daily. One American railroad exceeds our entire national capacity. The prisoners organized lectures to share expertise and maintain morale. During a presentation on naval architecture, Henke learned that American shipyards employed 1.7 million workers. The entire Kriegsmarine, including every sailor, officer and support personnel, numbered 800,000. American shipyard workers alone outnumbered all German naval forces 2-1. The workforce building ships exceeded the workforce sailing and fighting in them. Summer turned to autumn. The camp's vegetable gardens, tended by prisoners, produced yields that mocked German agricultural science. Tennessee soil, enriched by fertilizers freely available despite wartime, generated vegetables of size and quantity that suggested God himself had taken sides. A single acre produced more food than 3 acres of worn European soil. The prisoners ate fresh corn, tomatoes, squash, vegetables that had become myths in Germany. The camp received a shipment of winter clothing in October. Brand new wool coats, manufactured in Chicago, sized specifically for the prisoner population based on measurements taken during processing. The German military hadn't issued new winter coats since 1942. Soldiers stripped them from Russian dead. Here, prisoners of war received tailored garments that would have been luxury items in pre-war Berlin. Henke discovered the camp hospital had received a shipment of penicillin, the miracle drug that remained a closely guarded military secret. Yet here it was, available to treat German prisoners. A Jewish doctor from New York, Captain Abraham Roth, administered the life-saving medication to Wehrmacht soldiers who had worn belt buckles proclaiming Gott mit uns while serving a regime dedicated to exterminating his people. The moral superiority demonstrated by this act of medical care struck deeper than any propaganda could achieve. November brought news that chilled the German officers more than Tennessee's early winter. The Americans announced they had produced their 100,000th aircraft of 1943, 100,000 aircraft in 11 months. The Luftwaffe's total production since 1933 hadn't reached that figure. More devastating, American production was accelerating. December's output was projected to exceed 9,000 aircraft in that month alone. Captain Ernst Bauer, a Stuka pilot shot down over Sicily, calculated grimly, 9,000 aircraft monthly means 300 daily. The Reich's best day ever produced 78 aircraft. The Americans build in 3 days what we build in a month. In a month, they build our annual production. He paused, then added with hollow voice, and they're sending half to Britain and Russia. The camp library subscribed to American newspapers and magazines. Life magazine's December issue featured a photo essay on American war production. Images showed women building B-24 bombers in a factory that hadn't existed 2 years earlier. The Willow Run plant in Michigan, the article boasted, rolled out one 4-engine bomber every 63 minutes. Every 63 minutes, German factories required 3 weeks to build one 4-engine bomber, and they had largely ceased trying. Fortune magazine profiled Andrew Jackson Higgins, whose New Orleans factories produced landing craft faster than the Germans could count them. 20,000 landing craft by year's end, with capacity to land entire armies on hostile shores. The German Navy's entire surface fleet couldn't transport a single division across water. Henke studied production charts in these magazines with the intensity he'd once reserved for convoy routing patterns. American steel production, 80 million tons annually. Germany, 30 million tons, achieved only by melting down church bells and park fences. American aluminum production, 920,000 tons. Germany, 200,000 tons, insufficient even for current aircraft production. American truck production, 800,000 vehicles in 1943 alone. The Wehrmacht relied on horses for 80% of its logistics. The numbers achieved a terrible poetry. Each statistic was a nail in Germany's coffin, hammered home by industrial might that transformed raw materials into weapons faster than combat could consume them. America was not winning the war through superior strategy or braver soldiers. It was drowning the Axis in an avalanche of production that defied every assumption about industrial capacity. Christmas 1943 arrived with packages from the International Red Cross and various American charitable organizations. German prisoners received fruitcakes, chocolate, cigarettes, warm socks, writing paper, and small gifts that would have been treasures in Germany. The guards ate the same meal as prisoners on Christmas Day: turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie. No distinction between captor and captive in this season of abundance. Oberleutnant Herbert Werner, U-boat commander and Knight's Cross recipient, stood beside Henke watching American guards play football with prisoners in the snow. "We thought we were fighting a nation of jazz musicians and Hollywood actors," he said quietly. "We're fighting Henry Ford's assembly line. We're fighting the Tennessee Valley Authority. We're fighting Standard Oil and U.S. Steel and General Motors. We're fighting an entire continent that turned itself into a machine for making war." A new arrival, Hauptmann Klaus Fischer from the Afrika Korps, brought news from the Italian front. "The Americans apologized," he said, still seeming stunned. Their supply officer apologized because they only had vanilla ice cream for Thanksgiving, not chocolate. Ice cream. In November, in the mountains of Italy. They're shipping ice cream to the front lines while our men boil leather boots for soup. The revelation that American forces considered ice cream a wartime necessity, requiring official apology for flavor limitations, broke something in the assembled officers. Several laughed, the bitter laugh of men recognizing the absurdity of their position. They had invaded Russia believing in their technological superiority. They had challenged America believing in their warrior spirit. Now they ate better as prisoners than they had as officers, watching their captors apologize for insufficient variety in frozen desserts served to combat troops. January 1944 brought the camp newspaper's announcement of American production goals for the new year: 120,000 aircraft, 90,000 tanks, 17 million tons of shipping. The numbers were so large they ceased to have meaning. How does one conceptualize 120,000 aircraft? Lined up wingtip to wingtip, they would stretch from Berlin to Tokyo. Their combined bomb load could level every city in Europe in a single mission. Korvettenkapitän Henke received permission to teach navigation to fellow prisoners. During one lesson, he used American merchant shipping as an example. The Americans currently operate 4,000 Liberty ships. Each carries 10,000 tons of cargo. That's 40 million tons of shipping capacity. They're building 3 new ships daily. By this time next year, they'll have 5,000 ships. Meanwhile, we've sunk, he paused, calculating, perhaps 600 American vessels total. We're sinking them 5 times slower than they're building them. A student asked, "Then why did we start this war?" Henke had no answer. None of them did. They had started the war believing in German superiority, technological, racial, spiritual. They sat in a Tennessee prison camp, eating better than German civilians, watching newsreels of American abundance, calculating the mathematical certainty of their nation's defeat. The war would continue for another 16 months, but for these men, it had already ended. It had ended the moment they saw those 27 Liberty ships in Norfolk Harbor. It had ended when they counted the railroad cars full of tanks. It had ended when they received fresh oranges in Tennessee. The great irony was that America hadn't fully mobilized. Henke learned from guards that civilian automobile production continued, though reduced. Americans still manufactured refrigerators, washing machines, radios for civilian use. The nation that was burying Germany in war production hadn't even converted completely to war footing. What would have happened if they had? Late in January, the camp received its most distinguished prisoner, General Oberst Ludwig Kruvel, former commander of the Afrika Korps. Kruvel had been Rommel's second in command, a soldier who had fought from Poland to France to Africa. He arrived at Crossville, broken not by interrogation, but by touring American training facilities during his transit. "They showed me Camp Shelby in Mississippi," he told the assembled officers. 200,000 acres. Acres! They're training entire divisions simultaneously. Fresh divisions, fully equipped every few weeks. They have so many men they're choosing who not to draft, selecting the highest quality, rejecting millions as unnecessary. He paused, his voice dropping. "I watched 18-year-old recruits training with more ammunition than my veterans in Africa ever saw. They were shooting bullets at paper targets for practice that we would have hoarded for crucial battles. They were wasting fuel in training maneuvers that would have supplied a panzer division for a week. Their concept of scarcity is our concept of abundance." February brought letters from home through the Red Cross. The letters, written months earlier, spoke of bombing raids, food shortages, children evacuated to the countryside. Henke's wife mentioned, in the coded language families develop, that she had traded her wedding china for potatoes. Wedding china for potatoes. He looked at his lunch tray. Beef stew with fresh vegetables, white bread with butter, apple pie, coffee. His wife was starving in Hamburg while he ate apple pie in Tennessee. The cognitive dissonance broke men in ways combat never had. They had been prepared to die for the fatherland. They hadn't been prepared to live comfortably as prisoners while the fatherland collapsed into starvation and rubble. The abundance surrounding them became a daily reminder of the Reich's delusions and their own complicity in believing them. Spring 1944 arrived with news of American preparations for invasion of France. The camp received copies of Stars and Stripes, the American military newspaper which made no effort to conceal the massive build-up in England. Why should they hide it? What could Germany do to stop it? The paper casually mentioned statistics that would have been top military secrets in Germany. 2.8 million American troops in Britain, 5,000 vessels assembled for invasion, 11,000 aircraft ready to provide cover. Hauptmann Wilhelm Müller, an intelligence officer captured in Italy, studied the numbers obsessively. If these figures are accurate, and why would they lie when the truth is more demoralizing? They could invade anywhere from Norway to Spain. We can't defend 4,000 kilometers of coastline against that force. It's not militarily possible. The German officers organized a war game, using their professional expertise to plan the optimal defense against American invasion. After 3 days of careful planning, considering every advantage of interior lines, fortified positions, and defensive terrain, they reached an unanimous conclusion. Delay was possible, victory was not. American material superiority had reached the point where tactical brilliance became irrelevant. You cannot outmaneuver unlimited resources. D-Day came and went. The camp received newsreels within a week, footage of American troops pouring onto Norman beaches, of supply ships disgorging trucks and tanks in quantities that defied counting, of artificial harbors towed across the channel and assembled like toys. The Mulberry harbors alone represented engineering capacity that Germany couldn't have achieved with 5 years of preparation. America built 2 in 5 months. General Major Johannes Brune, captured after the fall of Rome, arrived at Crossville with stories that further shattered illusions. In Italy, American artillery fired preparatory barrages that lasted hours. Hours! We rationed shells to 5 per gun per day. They fired 100-round barrages at suspected positions. They called in artillery on single snipers. They have so much ammunition, they use it for convenience rather than necessity. By summer 1944, the camp held over 3,000 German officers. They formed a small university, teaching everything from literature to engineering. But the most attended lectures were those analyzing American industrial methods. How did they achieve such production? How did they coordinate such logistics? How did they maintain quality while manufacturing at such speed? The answer, gradually understood, was systematic efficiency combined with virtually unlimited resources and a workforce that believed in what they were building. A Jewish American guard, Sergeant David Goldstein from Detroit, provided unexpected insight during a casual conversation with Henke. "My dad works at Ford. He's on the B-24 line at Willow Run. Says every worker knows someone in uniform. Every rivet we drive, every bolt we turn might save somebody's cousin, somebody's neighbor's kid. That's why we work double shifts. That's why grandmothers are building bombers. It's personal." This was what the Nazi leadership had never understood. They had turned America's diversity into unity through threat. Every American hyphen, Jewish American, Italian American, Polish American represented a group with personal reasons to destroy the Reich. America hadn't simply outproduced Germany, it had outmotivated it. August brought news of liberation of Paris. The camp watched newsreel footage of American trucks rolling down the Champs-Élysées, each vehicle representing industrial capacity Germany couldn't match. The GMC Deuce and a Half trucks were so numerous they had become background noise, yet each one was a miracle of mass production. 20-cylinder engines, synchronized transmissions, standardized parts that could be swapped between vehicles. Germany still used adapted civilian vehicles, each requiring unique spare parts. A new prisoner, Oberst Helmut Bennemann, from a panzer division destroyed in Normandy, provided the most damning testimony yet. "We ambushed a column of Shermans. Destroyed 8 tanks. The Americans simply pushed them off the road and continued advancing. Within hours, replacement tanks arrived." Hours. When we lost a Tiger tank, we waited weeks for replacement, if it came at all. They replaced 8 Shermans before we could refuel our surviving tanks. The mathematics of industrial warfare had become simple. America could replace losses faster than Germany could inflict them. Every tactical victory became strategic irrelevance when the enemy could instantly regenerate their forces. It was like fighting the mythical Hydra, except instead of 2 heads growing back, 10 Sherman tanks appeared for every one destroyed. September's camp newspaper reported American war production had exceeded all 1943 records. The country was producing 1 aircraft every 5 minutes, 1 tank every 7 minutes, 1 Liberty ship every day. These weren't propaganda figures, they were understatements. The reality was even more overwhelming. America was supplying not only its own forces, but equipping Free French, Polish, Brazilian, and dozen other allied armies. The arsenal of democracy had become the arsenal of half the world. Henke calculated, if America maintained current production rates, by war's end, they would have manufactured enough vehicles to motorize every division of every army on Earth. Enough aircraft to station 1 over every square mile of German territory. Enough ships to bridge the Atlantic Ocean hull to hull. The numbers had transcended military utility and entered the realm of industrial art. Production for the sake of proving it could be done. The camp's Protestant chaplain, a Lutheran minister from Iowa named Captain Eric Nordstrom, held services in German. His sermon on forgiveness contained an observation that cut deeper than intended. America forgives its enemies because we can afford to. Magnanimity is a luxury of the victorious. The German officers understood. Their nation, impoverished by war, would have no such luxury. They would face judgment without the resources for redemption. October brought the war's strangest delivery to Camp Crossville: ice cream machines. The U.S. Navy had decided every base, every ship, every facility should have the ability to make ice cream for morale purposes, even prisoner of war camps. German officers who had commanded U-boats in Arctic waters, who had survived depth charging and aerial bombardment, stood in line to receive vanilla ice cream made by machines their nation couldn't have manufactured even in peacetime. Fregatten Captain Robert Geise, veteran of 30 war patrols, held his ice cream cone with trembling hands. "This is insanity," he said to Henke. Absolute insanity. They're shipping ice cream machines while we're melting wedding rings for gold. They're worried about their soldiers' morale desserts while our men are eating sawdust bread. What kind of war is this? It was industrial war. Total war. A war where victory went not to the bravest or the most dedicated, but to whoever could produce the most aluminum, refine the most petroleum, forge the most steel. Germany had started a war of ideology and will. America had responded with a war of production schedules and logistics tables. The romantics had met the industrialists, and romance had died beneath an avalanche of mass-produced metal. November 1944. News arrived of B-29 superfortresses bombing Japan from the Mariana Islands. Each B-29 cost more than $1 million, more than Germany spent on an entire fighter squadron. America had built over 2,000 of them. The planes were pressurized, heated, equipped with analog computers for bombing accuracy. They represented technology Germany might have achieved by 1960, if ever. Yet America mass-produced them like automobiles. The final revelation came from an unexpected source. A copy of the 1944 Sears Roebuck Christmas catalogue, somehow delivered to the camp library. The prisoners passed it around like pornography, not for its images of women modeling clothes, but for its casual display of plenty. Electric trains for children, refrigerators for homes, automobiles available for post-war delivery, washing machines, radios, furniture, toys, the domestic economy continuing parallel to history's greatest military production. Henke found the catalogue's statistics more devastating than any intelligence report. If American civilians could still purchase luxury goods, if the home economy remained so robust that companies advertised for post-war sales, then Germany faced not just military defeat, but civilizational eclipse. America was fighting World War II with its spare industrial capacity while maintaining civilian abundance. Germany had sacrificed everything and still lost. December 1944 brought news of the Ardennes offensive, Germany's last desperate gamble. The camp's German officers studied the reports with professional interest but personal detachment. They knew what American intelligence apparently didn't. This was not a resurgence, but a death spasm. Germany had concentrated its last reserves, its final hoarded fuel, its remaining elite units for one throw of the dice. Even if temporarily successful, it meant nothing against American industrial mathematics. Oberst Heinrich Borgmann, captured during the offensive's first week, confirmed their suspicions. We advanced until we ran out of fuel. We couldn't capture American supply dumps because they burned them rather than let us have them. They can afford to burn more fuel than we had for the entire offensive. They destroyed supplies as a precaution that would have supplied our army for months. The Battle of the Bulge lasted 6 weeks. American production during those 6 weeks exceeded all German production for 1944. While Wehrmacht soldiers froze in Belgian forests, American factories produced 12,000 aircraft, 4,000 tanks, 90 Liberty ships, and enough ammunition to supply operations for the next year. The offensive designed to shock America into negotiation had barely registered against the momentum of its industrial output. January 1945 arrived with the camp processing its 5,000th prisoner. 5,000 German officers in one camp in Tennessee. Nationwide, America held 375,000 German prisoners, more Germans than America had lost in the entire war. They were guarded by rear echelon troops, often recovering wounded or men deemed unfit for combat. America had so much manpower, it could dedicate third-line soldiers to guarding an enemy army larger than most nations' entire military. The camp received its last significant prisoner group in March 1945, survivors from the Rhine crossing. Young officers, boys really, who had held the West Bank of Germany's last natural barrier for exactly 4 days before American material superiority swept them aside. One lieutenant, barely 19, spoke in a monotone that suggested shell shock. They built bridges faster than we could destroy them. Pontoon bridges, Bailey bridges, railroad bridges. They crossed at 17 points simultaneously. When we destroyed one bridge, they built two more. They have bridge-building equipment in quantities we use for ammunition. April brought news. Even the German officers had trouble believing. President Roosevelt had died, and the war continued without pause. In any other nation, the death of wartime leadership would cause crisis. America simply swore in a vice president most Germans had never heard of, and continued bombing Germany into rubble. The system functioned independent of individuals. The machine ground on. Then came the moment that ended all illusions forever. On April 30th, 1945, the camp commandant summoned all senior German officers. Colonel Drake's face was grim as he made an announcement through his interpreter. "Gentlemen, I regret to inform you that Allied forces have liberated multiple concentration camps in German territory: Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau. The films and photographs, the evidence is overwhelming." He paused, struggling with professional courtesy toward men he suddenly saw differently. "You will be shown this evidence. It is not optional. Every German prisoner will see what was done in Germany's name, what you were fighting to preserve." The screening room, usually filled with Hollywood movies and newsreels, became a chamber of horror. The films showed bulldozers pushing skeletal bodies into mass graves. American soldiers, hardened combat veterans, vomiting at the smell. General Eisenhower forcing German civilians to walk through camps, to see what their society had built with the efficiency they so prized. The same organizational capacity that had processed prisoners at Camp Crossville had been perverted into machinery for mass murder. Henke watched General Oberst Kruvel weep openly, not from sympathy for the victims, that would come later maybe for some, but from the realization that everything had been for nothing. They had served evil. Their professional excellence, their courage, their sacrifice had protected and enabled the very antithesis of civilization. American industrial might hadn't just defeated them militarily, it had exposed them morally. The contrast was absolute. America, with power to annihilate, had fed German prisoners ice cream. Germany, claiming cultural superiority, had built factories for extermination. America's assembly lines produced abundance. Germany's produced death. The moral verdict was as decisive as the military one. May 8, 1945, VE Day. The German officers stood at attention as the camp's American flag was raised. The war in Europe was over. But for the men in Camp Crossville, the war had been over since the moment they saw American reality. Some had realized it watching Liberty ships in Norfolk Harbor, others counting tanks on trains, still others receiving fresh oranges in Tennessee winter. Each had experienced their moment of revelation when the truth became undeniable. They had challenged a nation whose industrial capacity exceeded not just their ability to match, but their ability to comprehend. Werner Henke would remain in Camp Crossville until 1946. He would return to a Germany divided, occupied, dependent on American aid for survival. The nation that had sought to conquer the world would queue for American grain shipments. The 1,000-year Reich had lasted 12 years. American industrial supremacy would define the next century. Years later, in his memoirs, Henke would write, "We thought we were fighting Americans. We were actually fighting the combined output of General Motors, U.S. Steel, Standard Oil, Boeing, Douglas, Kaiser Shipyards, Alcoa Aluminum, DuPont Chemical, General Electric, Westinghouse, Chrysler, Ford, and 10,000 other corporations whose names I learned as a prisoner. We were fighting the Tennessee Valley Authority and the Hoover Dam. We were fighting Iowa Corn and Texas Oil and Pittsburgh Steel. We were fighting Detroit assembly lines and California shipyards and Manhattan engineering projects we couldn't even imagine. We confused Hitler's rhetoric with reality. The Americans didn't. They simply built victory, one rivet at a time."